Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Legally Speaking. I'm your host, Oves Anwer. It's that time of the year again, when apart from seeking respite from the heat, we're also seeking respite from taxes. Yes, that's right, it's budget season. And this budget promises quite a few changes, from the removal of the pink tax to making property deals and property transfers cheaper. To understand all of this, I am joined by barrister Ahtasham Mukhtar, who is a lawyer practicing in Lahore and Islamabad. He's also legal advisor to the Federal Board of Revenue. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Ahtasham, I wanted to begin by discussing, the concept of taxation, really. And under our constitution, is the government free to tax anyone they want? Are there any limits, really, constitutional limits as such, on who or what the government can tax?
Right. So the short answer to that is going to be no. The government cannot tax anyone they want and at whatever rate they want. Federal government is empowered by the Constitution of Pakistan by virtue of Article 77 that they can levy any taxes by or under an act of parliament. And that act of parliament is subject to, obviously, as and when the cases are being filed against the vires of the said law, whether the said law is ultra vires to the constitution or not. And the federal government, by virtue of federal legislative list, so there is a federal legislative list attached to the Constitution of Pakistan, fourth schedule. The parliament can only make laws to the extent of the subjects written in the said list. For example, income tax is in that list, federal excise duty is in that list, customs duty, and so on. However, one of the taxes, let's say sales tax on services, that by virtue of the 18th Amendment has been devolved to the provinces, and the litigation on that is still pending before different courts. And I know one of the petition, very important cases being heard in Lahore High Court, and it is in fact listed on Tuesday.
Okay.
We are still to determine how sales tax on services is to be levied and collected from companies which are transprovincial, because transprovincial is something only which federal government can make laws, not the provinces. So that is my reason why I said no, because there are so many factors to be taken into account. And obviously, as and when the laws are made, they are obviously challenged. And there is litigation on that every day, every year, every month. Good for all of us,
Ahtasham, I certainly understand that point. Now, the courts have, again, as you mentioned, and you're involved in this yourself, the courts have repeatedly been asked whether taxes, whether they're constitutional, whether they're vires of the finance bills that really, create them. And the super tax was one that was challenged recently. I believe you were involved in that as well.
Yeah, I was right.
And, when does a tax become legally vulnerable like that? Or when does a tax, when is it challenged in that?
So there are several grounds, obviously, to challenge any fiscal statutes before the courts. Usually it starts off in the high courts. And since we have already mentioned super tax, let's talk about super tax. It was obviously introduced through Finance Act 2022.
Okay.
And it was given retrospective effect, which essentially means that for the tax year 2022 and onwards, this tax is to be levied. Now, and obviously there was a proviso that, look, these certain sectors are going to be taxed at a higher rate. So for regular, let's say individuals or taxpayers, it is going to be 4%. But proviso was that for XYZ sector, let's say cement, airlines, and so on, they were imposed super tax at the rate of 10%. And writ petitions were filed in the Lahore High Court, and the single bench held that, look, the law has been validly enacted. The requirement to make the law retrospective exists in the statute. However, the proviso is discriminatory and violative of Article 25. Hence, the single bench upheld the primary law, but it declared the proviso to be ultra vires.
I see.
Now, aggrieved of this was that taxpayer filed the ICA, the appeal, which is intra-court appeal. Taxpayer filed an ICA against the main provision being protected, and the board, which I was representing, also filed the appeals to the extent of that proviso. That, look, this proviso, we have created it in a way which is not ultra vires, and we have created intelligible differentia We have
Yeah,
created a classification, hence it is not discriminatory. Eventually, the division bench of the Lahore High Court, and obviously this all was challenged in Islamabad High Court, Sindh High Court, Peshawar High Court, and Lahore High Court. So I was part of the team that was representing the board in Lahore High Court.
I see.
And the division bench held that, look, the law has not been validly enacted retrospectively, and it will only be applicable for tax year 2023 and onwards, not 2022.
I
And
see.
it obviously dismissed the appeals filed by us
Hmm.
that the proviso is obviously ultra vires. So relief to some great extent was granted to the taxpayers, and eventually against that decision of the High Court, Revenue filed their appeals before the Supreme Court, and by virtue of the 27th Amendment, they ended up in the Federal Constitutional Court. And
I see.
most recently, they have obviously announced their decision, and they have even announced their detailed reasoning that, look, the retrospectivity was in accordance with the law, in
Hmm.
accordance with the Constitution. So the law will be applicable for tax year 2022 and onwards. Then they also held that the proviso is also intra-virus and it is not violative of Article 25.
I
And in
see.
doing so, they also protected and dismissed the petitions to the extent of when when the Parliament through uh, Finance Act 2023 increased the rate of super tax at 10% for all classes. So
Hmm.
it was retrospectively even increased at 10% for all classes. So that was also upheld by the FCC, though, by the way. But
I see.
now I hope in the next, I don't know, I'm sure, I'm not sure, but I think this super tax is going to be omitted. 4C will no longer be in the statute, but let's see.
Of course, and that's really the upcoming budget or the budget that should be released very soon, momentarily. I wanted to discuss that briefly. Now, I think the government has tried to give a direction that it's going to try to broaden the tax base and really not enforce new tax rates as such. Now, from a legal standpoint, what enforcement powers does FBR have to really, enhance that base to get people, and especially businesses and smaller businesses, involved, within the tax bracket there, and where do they hit, constitutional or due process limits?
There is. So I, I've been watching these shows on the TV and on the YouTube, let's say.
Hmm.
Um, they have now are, I think, attempting to introduce another Tajir Do scheme, which in a way will be that, look, we need to bring this sector of retail into the tax base because ये लोग unregulated हैं, they're not being paying their taxes. So we are going to make an attempt to bring them into the class that pays their taxes. However, I think many critics on over the shows have obviously said that this is not going to work, and rather I must say they are granting a lot of relief that you are going to be paying one-off tax, I think 25,000 per year,
Yeah.
and by virtue of that, you'll be given a QR code which you can attach outside your store or anywhere that you do your business,
Hmm.
and the officials for the FBR can, let's say, scan and will not be allowed to enter your premises to do any of the inspection, which powers are obviously there under the law, the income tax ordinance. They have these statutes, the Federal Excise Duty Act, Federal Excise Act, and Sales Tax Act. They
Okay.
have these provisions, but let me give you an example. Uh, I did a case in the High Court, and it was regarding, look, this said person is doing a business. This
Hmm.
said person is not registered with the board. So we don't know how much business he is conducting, and we don't know what kind of business he has previously conducted.
Yeah.
So they went and first they compulsorily registered him,
Okay.
which was imperative, because I'll tell you what happens if it is not done in accordance with the law. So first you are required by law to register him or whatever business that is in accordance with the provisions of the federal statutes, and only then you can look to the previous transactions that he has done, and that will obviously subject to the limitation of 4 or 5 year that's being amended from time to time.
Hmm.
But the due process is going to be first register and then add whatever taxes that you want to add on the previous transactions. And in some of the cases, this was not done. And
I
they were
see.
eventually they were eventually decided in the favor of the taxpayers, that I've been assessed on tax, and even when I was not registered. So there is a forum before the High Court, which is ATIR, Appellate Tribunal, Inland Revenue, and then I think those cases were even decided by the High Court in the favor of the taxpayer, that the due process has not been followed. This is violative of Article 10A, the principle that you have a right to be treated with natural justice, and so
Mm-hmm.
on. So eventually, this was one of the case. And there is one more provision I should identify, that is 175, Section 175 of the Income Tax Ordinance. That was that, look, if FBR, and this is obviously subject to many requirements which are prescribed in the law, that you, let's say, selected somebody for audit. A certain company was conducting a business and you chose that we are going to select them for audit. Call the record and see that how much business are they doing, what are they paying their taxes or not, which is obviously sarkar ka right hai. Sarkar has a right to know that I'm trusting you with your taxes. I want to know how much taxes are being paid. So
Absolutely, yeah.
they are not complying with the let's say audit notices. We sent them one notice, two notices, and they have not complied with those. Then the board, they can choose to, either the chief commissioner of the field formation or the board can pass an order that I am going to be passing an order for the enforcement of any of the provisions of the statute, and then send a team to those their business premises and collect whatever data they have and they
Mm-hmm.
want for the audit purposes. And I can tell you this happened for one of the taxpayers, a large taxpayers in Lahore. They eventually filed a writ before the High Court, which was dismissed. They said, look, you were not complying with the audit notices, hence they were within their right to enter your premises and pass an order to that effect, and then collect data, even your checkbooks and whatnot. That eventually was dismissed by the High Court. So these powers are there, but obviously they have to be compliant with the Constitution of Pakistan and the principle of natural justice.
Absolutely. Ehtisham, we've seen, that there's, I think, a difficult balance that really needs to be found between coercive measures of forcing people to be within the net and, incentives, really. And we've seen, both being used by the government. What is your take? How do you think a balance should be made, or does Pakistan need to go towards more coercive approach, or is it, the incentive-based items
Yeah.
there?
Let's say I'll tell you one of the amendments that were made in the income tax ordinance, obviously, which were applicable to the Federal Excise Act and the Sales Tax Act. Look, hota ye tha, let's say tribunal, the
Mm-hmm.
tribunal ATIR is the final forum for factual controversies as to what document is required to be looked at and so on. And a reference is then filed before the High Court either by the Revenue Department or the taxpayers.
Yeah.
And there is a principle that, look, you cannot make recovery of the tax against the taxpayer unless one independent forum outside the hierarchy of the Revenue Department to decide that case.
Mm-hmm.
ATIR being that independent forum, because commissioner decides the case at the first instance, then appeal is filed before the commissioner appeals, and then to the ATIR. Commissioner appeal bhi inka apna banda hota hai. That's an officer of the board.
Yeah.
Now, so the principle is that unless this tax amount is determined by the ETIR, you should not take coercive actions to recover the said money, because let's do that. And yes, this used to happen a lot. And अगर recovery हो जाती है in these cases, so they were able to file petitions in the courts, which were eventually allowed and granted relief. However, they made an amendment in the law that when a reference is filed before the High Court
Mm-hmm.
and there is a recovery notice, let's say of 100 rupees, so the court is only going to grant interim relief if it is agreed that 30% of the assessed amount, let's 30 rupees, have to be paid.
Yeah.
And 70, then you can obviously be granted relief to the extent by the High Court, which in a way was a method. In a way, this was an act of parliament, by the way, so it was challenged too, but I don't know what happened to those cases, because some people tried, but I think it didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually now, if you want interim relief by the High Court, you'll have to come in and give 30% of the revenue assessed,
I see.
which is also in a way uh, concerning, because up taxpayers, let's say I'm let's say talking to somebody who's an officer of the Inland Revenue, and I told him, look, ye ho raha hai. Let's say he calls me up, ke yaar Ahtasham, we have a very technical case and we want to discuss it with you.
Mm-hmm.
So he told me like, Ahtasham, वो मेरे पास आए थे इस केस से रिलेटेड, बट उन्होंने मुझे ये कहा था कि सर आप हमसे थोड़ा बहुत टैक्स ले लें, वरना ATIR से हमारा काम कम में हो जाएगा. आई डोंट नो इफ आई शुड से दिस और नॉट, एंड यू कैन डिसाइड टू कीप इट, बट आई थिंक ऐसा हो रहा है. एंड ही सेड कि अच्छा हो गया. The officer told me कि ATIR has now decided a case, which is a very respected institution in this sector, and they
Of
said
course.
कि वो उन्होंने करवा लिया ATIR से, and then we have to go to the High Court. They were engaging me then to challenge that order of the ATIR, which is everyone's right कि हम कहाँ तक Supreme Court, FCC तक, everyone has a right to file an appeal. So that is extremely concerning, because taxpayers अब ये कहते हैं to my friends who are practicing and representing the taxpayers.
Yeah.
Well, I am representing the board. तो they were like यार, they are of the view कि वकील को engage करने से बेहतर है, फिर हाई कोर्ट में भी 30% का ऑर्डर होगा, तो what we can do is get the case decided by the ATIR in their favor.
I see.
And unfortunately, this happens apparently. I think everyone is aware of it.
Yeah, this is always an issue, unfortunately, in Pakistan. Ehtisham, this budget, again, we're expecting that it's going to heavily lean on, the same documented sectors that it's always leaned on, right? The salaried class and your filer versus non-filer distinction. And there'll be sections like, 236K on property withholding and whatnot. Does repeated taxation of the same sectors raise any constitutional concerns around maybe equality? Like, I mean, I'm a salaried class individual, and there is a level of resentment when I see that, they're big businessmen, or there are even average businessmen who don't have to pay, or aren't really paying anything.
They are not. Trust me, they are not. I know this every day. I'm in court. At least now it is every day from Monday to Thursday. Friday को छुट्टी होती है, which finished as of today, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say 236K is a tax obviously being paid by the person who is purchasing a property.
Yeah.
Most recently, in Finance Act 2024, the Act of Parliament made an attempt. This was, by the way, prior to the new current chairman. This was just before this current chairman was appointed.
Okay.
And what they did was that, look, I'm going to create another schedule in the income tax ordinance, which will be for a third category. There is filer and non-filer. Ordinary language, we call it filer and non-filer. Legally, it's called active taxpayers list.
Yeah.
So they created a third category, people who have furnished their return, but they did not do so within the time required under the income tax ordinance.
Okay.
So they are late filers.
Mm-hmm.
In ordinary language, they are late filers. So they created a 10th schedule. उसमें जो rate थे for 236, they were comparatively higher as compared to first schedule.
See, okay.
So this was an attempt to encourage people to file their returns on time.
Mm-hmm.
So they were, and this was an attempt, good attempt by the board. It was actually an act of parliament, and then there was a circular too. There was litigation on that too as well, by the way, and it was that कि look, अब आपने जो इनका देखना है conduct of late filing, is it going to be prospectively or retrospectively? Because आज से हमने देखना कि अगले 3 साल में कौन late file करता है, या is it going to be past 3 years when this provision or this schedule did not exist? And eventually I was counsel in that case, and eventually the single bench of the High Court, Lahore High Court, determined that look, this law and this provision and this enactment will have prospective effect. So this will be for people who file their returns late for the tax year 2024, 2025, 6. जो ये लेट फाइल करेंगे तो उनको आप इस कैटेगरी में डालेंगे, स्टार्टिंग obviously with tax year 2024. So they do make attempts and to collect these taxes, and I'm being told that there is going to be quite some change in 236C and K.
I see.
236C is, by the way, the tax which is collected from person who is selling the property,
Yeah.
and 236 is somebody who's purchasing the property. So let's see kya hota hai. We really want to see, and I think if they reduce or abolish one of these provisions, it will eventually mean that people will buy and sell a lot more property than they usually do,
Yeah,
which
it's
can
certainly.
also be.
I think it's going to make a difference, especially in a market, property market, which is very depressed at the moment,
It is.
right? So I think there is something that I think real estate agents and just generally people who've made investments are expecting, at least on that front. Um, Ahtasham, what does the Constitution actually require when it comes to fairness and non-discrimination in taxation? Because again, the same question comes about that there are categories of people who we can identify who aren't really subject to the coercive measures. They don't want to come within the tax net, and they're living their lives, pretty much fine. So, is there some level of non-discrimination that people like myself can go to court and ask for?
Before I answer this question, look, in the Finance Act 2024, after the vote of not confidence and PDM coming into the power, through Finance Act, they created Finance Act 2022 created several other taxes too, by the way, which included capital value tax on assets, which was basically capital taxes on capital value of an asset. There was super tax, and there was obviously 7E. 7E was a tax on real properties, on the real estate sector, and which was, I think, last month or the 1 month before that, declared to be ultra vires by the Federal Constitutional Court, which was quite a big relief granted to this real estate sector, because a lot of people were not able to, let's say, buy more properties. वो
Yeah.
टैक्स था भी ऐसा ही जिनके पास बहुत ज़्यादा properties हैं.
Yeah.
So that was a relief granted. It was ultimately declared to be ultra vires because the court was of the view that this sector of transaction cannot be taxed by the parliament. This is a provincial subject. Province can make law on this. And
So,
it was eventually.
so this was mainly declared ultra vires because of the provincial thing, not because it would create inequality
No, it
as
was
such.
declared on the aspect that it is beyond the legislative competence of the
I see.
parliament. And coming back to your question, discrimination. Look, the power to tax includes power to destroy. ठीक है, लेट्स से आज अगर पार्लियामेंट चाहती है कि आपकी या मेरी सैलरी को 100% टैक्स करना है, तो दे कैन डू दैट.
Then they've destroyed
The
us.
problem is going to be that there might be a movement. I don't know if it is going to be a movement for people who are in the salaried class के वो protest करें, but because problem ये है कि उनको सुबह काम पे भी जाना है ना, they can't really protest.
So 5 बजे के बाद
5 बजे के बाद they can do something, and I think there is even an observation to this extent in the Supreme Court in one of the Supreme Court judgment that Parliament तो कर सकती है, तो तुम लोग Parliament में वो लोग भेजो who are not going to tax 100% of your income. So that's one way. And yes, if any law is discriminatory and violative of 25, we can challenge it in the courts, and they are in a way declared ultra vires. This happens. We can challenge it under Article 25, Article 4, Article 9, the due process.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned a really good point. The Parliament select the right people who go to Parliament and vote for. But there's also another factor in when it comes to tax policy in Pakistan. That's the IMF, really, right? Because we are part of these programs, Pakistan has taken perhaps the most programs globally of the IMF. How much of the budget is really shaped by the IMF program, and what is really the process by which IMF gives its input, and we are then kind of compelled to take action domestically?
The simplest form would be first there is IMF negotiations, which happens with Ministry of Finance.
Okay.
Right? And then Ministry of Finance is something that eventually proposes the money bill, which
Hmm.
becomes an act of parliament.
Yeah,
And yes, many commitments to the IMF eventually reflect in the laws which are being proposed. But to say कि IMF कोई law बना रहा है, that is incorrect. IMF has no legal basis or standing.
of
The
course.
Parliament is the uh, अदारा, the institution which will be imposing taxes. Because earlier मैंने शुरू में कहा था that Article 77 of the Constitution requires that any tax which is to be levied can only
Hmm.
be through an act of parliament, by or under an act of parliament,
Yeah.
and not by an executive action any of kind. So IMF does not really be on the table, is not on the table, but they are in a way shaping, and the parliament is passing laws based on the commitments I think they have made to these institutions. And yes, it is correct that they are in a way involved.
Absolutely. Etyam, I want to ask you a slightly big picture question, and this, also looks at the IMF and whatnot. But like, there is again another fine balance between too much taxation to make to earn money for the government, and then also depressing your economy, right? As we've seen, perhaps with with even the real estate sector. How do you think we should be really, making this balance there? And are we going in that direction, in your opinion?
I think they are making attempts to create a balance, but I don't know. I'm not sure how it will turn out, and
Hmm.
I hope and I pray that it does, because we often see that there is an undocumented economy of 400 billion. There is a documented economy of 400 billion dollars. I don't know. अगर वो 400 billion भी आ जाता है, तो I think we'll be in a great place,
Okay.
and eventually they can choose to reduce taxes on the salaried class. And I think वो करेंगे इस फाइनेंस एक्ट में, in a way some relief will be granted. At least ये सुना जा रहा है, but I don't know how this will work out. But it is important that the other sectors which are not paying their taxes, they be brought in the system.
Hmm.
That is the most crucial aspect.
Okay. And expanding the tax net, we started off with this, and I want to also close around these things. What do you think are certain steps, and or maybe certain sectors that really feel that are outside the tax net and really need to be brought in? And are there any measures that you would suggest, being a lawyer who advises on these issues?
I can give you actual examples. Let's say Urdu Bazaar is a market in Lahore. I'm
Hmm.
sure you must have heard about it. वहाँ पे these retailers are not registered with the board, right? The retailers, like जो tier one retailers हैं, like stores, the brands, the clothing lines, they have the certain machines, POS,
Yeah.
point of sale system is existing through which FBR can track how much sales are being conducted. But what about these sectors who are selling different, these traders selling different goods, but nobody has any idea
Yeah.
कि इनको कैसे, how much business are they conducting, how much turnover are they conducting. But अब वो उसमें प्रॉब्लम ये है कि लेट मी टेल यू, एफबीआर के जो मेरे ऑफिशियल्स जिनके साथ मेरी बातचीत होती है, जैसे कि
Hmm.
अब अगर हम इनके पास जाते हैं, लेट से इनको रजिस्टर करने या पीओएस लगाने, तो वो कहते हैं कि या तो हमें जेल में डाल दो या हमें कुछ और कर दो, बट दिस कैन नॉट हैपन.
Wow.
तो लोगों को आई थिंक हैव द पीपल विल हैव टू आई थिंक मेक अ चॉइस इन अ वे कि, एंड आई देयर इज आल्सो वन मोर थिंग दैट आई पर्सनली बिलीव कि लोग शायद ये कर सकते हैं. लेट्स से आई कैन चूज टू से कि मैंने इनसे चीज़ें नहीं खरीदनी.
Hmm.
I don't know if this will work or not, but I think attempts are being made. The Tajir Dost scheme that I mentioned, this was obviously an attempt कि आपको 25,000 रुपए का टैक्स हम लगाते हैं, वन ऑफ टैक्स फॉर द एंटायर ईयर,
Hmm.
एंड उसके बाद आपको टैक्स नहीं देना पड़ेगा. दिस विल इन अ वे क्रिएट के हमें पता चल जाएगा कि कौन कौन सी दुकानें कहाँ कहाँ पे रजिस्टर्ड हैं, and eventually we can lead towards POS installment on their premises. But I hope हो जाए ऐसा. Not sure.
No, absolutely. I think this is one of the most critical areas because it affects so many people, right? And it creates an inordinate burden on those who are paying taxes. I know some of the rates, I'm paying or you're paying are some of the highest in the world, really. And so, having said that, I think there's a lot that can still be done in terms of expanding that. But as a salaried class individual, my only hope is that the government makes a genuine attempt, because every time the budget is, we come into June, and we hear the same things, expand the tax net, and all we get is, more tax going from our hard-earned salaries towards the government there.
Do you care to know how taxes are deducted on the payments made? Let's say I'm their lawyer, FBR ka main vakeel hu, right? FBR, when they pay me, so they at the time they pay me, they deduct 15% at source on that entire transaction.
Wow.
So that goes to the board, which is fair. कोई बात नहीं.
Yeah.
This is the tax due. This is the tax due that I have to pay.
Absolutely,
सरकार
yes.
हमारे लिए है. This, लेकिन this is how taxes are being paid. Salaried class की salary में से tax deduct होता है.
Yeah, absolutely. And
then
look, this is, as Pakistanis, this is our duty, right? We enjoy this country, we enjoy the roads and the systems here. This is our duty to pay. But we'd also like that everybody else who is freeloading at the moment also pays their due share, right? So
we all do. We pray for it.
Inshallah.
And the relevant Sarkar, I think, is making attempts. I'll have to say they do, because I work with them and I've seen the attempts. And there are obviously many, many challenges that these guys faces as well, by the way.
Of
FBR
course.
के भी अपने challenges हैं. And they are genuinely trying with the current chairman and the team that I work with in Lahore. They are trying. I have to say that they are trying, but देखते हैं क्या होता है. देखते हैं क्या होता है.
No, absolutely. Ahtasham, thank you so much for joining me. Really enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking to you. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us.